Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and Cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/aggressive City 4453. The deer caught on my game camera is not right. I'm an avid hunter and tracker. I love to get outdoors and explore, shed hunt for antlers or just hike around to view wildlife. I live in the Rocky Mountains in southwest Montana. So the forests are endless and the wildlife are abundant. Recently, I've purchased 5 new game cameras to scope out around my property. These cameras catch anything and are superior to other brands out. I own around 20 acres of forest land with a nice little creek running through it. I put them all the way around the property to see anything and everything. Within a week I checked them. To my surprise, I had photos of a wide variety of wildlife on there, from porcupines, to coyotes, to deer, and even a cougar passing through. I never would have imagined I had so much going on throughout the property. The next week was strange, as my cameras had taken hundreds of photos but nothing was on them. As I kept browsing through the photos, something unnatural caught my eye. Far off in the distance in the last few photos I could see what looked like a deer, but it was not just any normal deer. The thing was standing upright on its 2 hind legs. And as the photos went on, it appeared as if it walked like that across the whole view of the camera. Still blown away by what I had seen, I felt the need to investigate further, so I made a tree stand by the camera that caught that freakishly looking deer. After completion, I was all ready to go. Since the activity was between 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning, I went to the stand at dusk to get hunkered down and ready to find out what that was. The first night I stayed until dawn, seeing nothing. But I heard some crazy noises like whispering and talking off in the distance. I felt it odd because my closest neighbors are 2 miles away. It sent chills down my spine, but I remained sitting all night. Night 2, nothing again until about 2:30 a.m. Then I heard branches breaking, like something was stomping through the woods off in the distance, just out of range to be able to see with my night vision binoculars. I kept looking as the thumping noise was getting louder. Then I heard what sounded like a woman crying from the same direction as the branches were being broken. This really got me freaked out now, as the crying became louder and it sounded like she was begging for someone to help her. I couldn't sit and just listen any longer. I then shouted out, "Where are you? I'm here, do you need assistance?" I got down off my tree stand and started running in the direction of the woman's crying, but it seemed as the closer I had gotten to her, she remained at about the same distance ahead of me. I kept taking to her, asking, "Where are you? Are you hurt?" And the same response, "Help me please." This went on for about 15 minutes and I thought to myself, what if this is some kind of trap? I've seen movies like this before. So I stopped and quickly turned around, started jogging back the way I came. This is where things get disturbing, as I was getting farther away from where I heard the crying and pleas for help. It was now getting closer to me as I was making my way back out of the woods. Now I'm scared shitless. I started sprinting towards the tree line to my property, as it sounded like whatever that was right on my tail, breaking branches, and it sounded big. I could hear its feet hitting the ground, thump, 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 thump. I finally hit the tree line and no longer heard the cries or begging for help. In the opening I turned around just before reaching my house, and back at the tree line I could see 2 glowing yellow eyes, a dark silhouette of a figure of what appeared to be about 7 to 8 foot tall. Whatever it was just stood there staring right at me. Then I heard a low, menacing growl. Terrified now, I ran back into my house, got out the AR-15, locked and loaded, ready to blow that thing away, but as you would know it, it was gone. I walked back out to the tree line and I could hear low whispers and talking again like two people having a conversation. I knew better than to follow the sound of voices this time. After owning the country property for 15 plus years, I decided it was time to move closer to civilization, for whatever was out there I definitely did not want to encounter it again. I don't know what it was planning that night, but it was definitely sinister. Second story. Hotel nightmare. Needless to say, I don't like staying at hotels much anymore. I drove 9 hours to meet my parents at a halfway mark to pick up my 2-year-old daughter at an agreed-on hotel. I assumed we were all going to stay there the night since we both had such a long drive. When I had grabbed all her things, I asked, "Are you going to stay here too?" My dad said, "No, we are gonna head back." I was a little disappointed, but I understood that they don't like hotels much. I checked in and went to our room. It was fairly late, but I don't sleep much at night. I am more of a night person. I turned the TV on and I was in my bed and my daughter was in hers. She fell asleep pretty quick, probably the car ride. I had all the lights off in the room, the only light was coming from the TV. I was sitting up against the headboard with my legs stretched out straight in front of me under the covers. All of a sudden, I felt something grab my toes, both feet at the same time. I quickly pulled my legs in toward me with my knees bent against my chest. I grabbed my phone and used the light on it to shine at the end of the bed. I didn't see anything. I sat there trying to look stoic, like I wasn't afraid, but inside I was screaming. I didn't want whatever it was to see me scared. After a few minutes of sitting there, acting like nothing just happened, I relaxed my legs and continued watching TV. Moments later, I felt pressure next to my leg, like a hand, like someone was leaning their body onto the bed from the end of the bed with both hands down on the mattress. Then I felt pressure as if their left hand moved forward and pressed down. Then, what felt like their right hand moved forward and closer to my knee. Then their left hand moved forward. It felt like someone or something was crawling up to my face, slowly and methodically. It was definitely a Harley Quinn type movement. I could feel the palm pushed down first, then the hand rolled forward to the fingers. Imagine it like how a person walks, heel to toe. The motion was very similar and very exaggerated. It was creepy and unsettling, like it was having fun. I flung off the blankets and jumped into my daughter's bed, hoping her innocence would save me. As I was facing the wall spooning her, I seen shadows go across the wall. I jumped up and turned the light on, frantically grabbing our stuff to pack up to leave. I went down to check out. It was about 4 a.m. The guy working said, "You are leaving early." I said, "Yeah, couldn't sleep, by chance." "Do you have anyone ever tell you this hotel is haunted?" I laughed nervously, waiting for him to laugh too, which I wish he would have. Instead he replied, "Why? What room were you in?" I told him and he replied, "I don't know why they put you over there. I never put people over there. Ever since we got new owners, they did a cleansing on the building, thinking things would get better, but since then, things have gotten worse." I told him, "Yeah, I don't think it worked." Third story. This story was shared by you/Retsma-Age6. Message from a Wendigo. I have been trapped here for too long. I can never forget the day I was taken. It was the dead of night. I had just killed my prey, a woman who had been foolish enough to wander into my home. I remember how happy I was that day, that I did not have to hunt, instead the food brought itself to me. If only I had known then, that my delight would soon turn into terror. The men came into my home and overpowered me. There were 3 of them. They were large, much larger than the normal men I hunted. Perhaps in different circumstances, would have killed and consumed them. But I was injured at the time. Not a grave injury, but it impeded me still. I had received the wound a week before, from a particularly resilient man. He had beat at my foot with a rock, damaging my ankle, even as I straddled his chest, tearing his throat open. Looking back, I still find myself appreciating the man's sheer will. But I appreciated his flesh much more. Even without the injury, the men would have been difficult to conquer. As I said, they were large, but not only that. They were carrying strange metal poles. They were warriors of some kind. The poles fired darts that struck me and made me drowsy. The men threw me into a metal carriage that moved by means I knew not, and still do not know. It was within this carriage I lost consciousness. I awoke, I know not when, in a metal cage. I was still in a slight daze. There were men all around, all just as large as the three who had attacked me. Initially, I was ecstatic. I was surrounded by food, and I did not see any of the men who had taken me. These ones did not have any metal poles, so they were easy prey. But when I attempted to escape, I found myself unable to damage the cage in any way. I shrieked and roared, and bashed at the cage. The men flinched in fear, and some pulled smaller metal objects from pouches at their hips. I drew myself to my full height, still towering above the men, despite them being larger than the ones I was accustomed to. I felt something hit me in my back, and I turned my head to see another dart had struck me. One of the men who had taken me had been behind me the whole time, on the other side of the cage, and he had fired another dart at me. Once again, I fell unconscious. When I awoke again, I was in a room. It was larger than the cage I had previously been, 10 paces wide and double across. But, this one did not offer the commodity of being able to see out of it. The walls were hard stone, and the door a harder metal. I tried to break out for hours, but I could not. I laid upon the ground, only thinking of my hunger. I was utterly ravenous. Whether it was morning, noon, or night, I had no way of knowing. All I knew was how famished I was. Even if only one day had passed since I had last eaten, it still would have been one day too many without food. My capture was, regrettably, my fault and mine alone. I had grown complacent. I was situated in a location with much prey, and I stayed for too long. I have lived for hundreds of years, and I have hunted in many places. I have preyed upon men of every color and creed. I have always hidden my tracks, and never stayed in one place for too long. But I was lulled into a false sense of security. My home, a deep cavern, was one I thought no man would find me in. I should have fled when that woman entered my home. If she could find her way in, of course warriors could. I curse my foolishness, but I must look forward. The past cannot be undone. All of this happened a while ago. I can only estimate the length of time that has passed. I assume it to be a fortnight. 1 fortnight, stuck in this prison. 1 fortnight too many. The men frequently take me from the room. They always do it the same way. A small part of the door is opened, and meat is thrown in. I devour it, for I am starving, always. I am rendered comatose moments afterwards. They have poisoned the food. In the brief seconds before I am unconscious, I can see the door open and men enter. I always awake in the same room, but in a different position from where I fainted. I know the men are taking me somewhere and returning me. I know not where they are taking me, nor what they are doing to me. The only way to avoid this would be not to eat the meat, and that is no option at all. My hunger will not allow it. Sometimes, the men try to speak to me. I can speak their simple language, of course. But I say nothing to them. I have no interest in doing so. Most of the time, the men leave me be. Sometimes, if I roar and bellow and strike at the walls too much, 5 men will enter the room, and hit me with darts. I have attempted to attack them, but their strength is shocking. I have grown weak since I arrived here. The men wrapped my injured foot in something. I am unsure of what it is, or what nefarious purpose it serves. I live in fear. I fear man. Man, whom I have preyed upon since I was created by the Great Spirit. Man, who have feared me, and indeed feared all Wendigos, now have made me feel fear. I fear their metal poles. I fear their size. I do not know why these ones are so big. A different tribe, perhaps. I am ashamed of myself for feeling this way. It is as if I am their pet. I often wonder where they get the meat from. It is man meat, without a doubt. They try to feed me other things, but I can only consume man meat. These men must kill and butcher their own kind to get it. Perhaps they consume other men as well. I shudder at the depravity of it. The thought of killing, or even worse, consuming my own kind, other Wendigos, makes me sick. I don't know what the people will do to me. I have heard a story of a Wendigo that was slaughtered by men. They chopped off his legs, then later cut him to small pieces. I imagine they will do something similar to me. Today, when I awoke, I found paper in my room. So, I write this message. I write it in my native tongue, which only Wendigos know, and is simply nonsensical gibberish to humans. I have no way of knowing where this message will go, but it is my only option. If any of my kind somehow finds this, please save me. I will forever be in your debt. Judy R.K. Bowman. The preceding transcript was written by a man named Ned Terrell. Canadian, 2.05 m tall, 34 years old. Worked as a dentist. Him and his girlfriend went missing 3 months and 4 days ago, and were presumed dead. Mr. Terrell lived a normal life prior to his disappearance. He received a proper education, was never abused, never had mental health issues, or any sort of violent behavior. All of his friends and family spoke of him quite highly, until they were informed of his actions. Those who knew Mr. Terrell noted that he had always been quite fascinated with superstitions, legends, and mythological creatures. On multiple occasions, he would go on trips to attempt to find these supernatural beings. He has traveled to Scotland to look for the Loch Ness Monster, America to find several creatures including Bigfoot and Mothman, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore to find a Pontianak, as well as several other countries. His most recent interest was the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a Native American legend, but is quite well known in Canada as well. It is somewhat surprising that Mr. Terrell never went looking for the Wendigo earlier than he did. The stories behind the Wendigo vary quite a fair amount. It is typically said to be a spirit that possesses humans and drives them to cannibalism, but it's also said to be its own individual creature which consumes human beings. Some sources also say that humans who resort to cannibalism to survive turn into Wendigos. Wendigos, despite often being depicted as anthropomorphic deer-like creatures, are actually traditionally described as giant humanoids that smell extremely foul, and can cause a chill, and in some iterations, a blizzard, wherever they go. Mr. Terrell went looking for the Wendigo on April the 6th. He went with his girlfriend, Iris Hall, 31. They went to Ontario, and explored deep into a forest that will remain unnamed. They informed their family and friends that they would be gone for at least a week, maybe a few days more. An extreme blizzard hit the area they were in, and their families were worried. After they still had not returned after 1 week and 5 days, they were reported as missing. After nearly a month of searching, they were not found, and were declared dead. 2 weeks after this, it was noted that several children were reported missing from towns near the forest. 20 children in 4 days. They found the bodies of several of the missing children, partially consumed. The worst was a 6-year-old boy, who I won't name out of respect for him and his family. I saw the body and, while I won't go into detail, I will note that the damage was so severe it was presumed that a bear had attacked him. Wildlife control was called in to reduce the animal population of any predators in the area. Well over 50 men were deployed and, over the course of the next couple of months, tranquilized and relocated dozens of wolves and bears. But the attacks never stopped, or even slowed. While almost all the missing people were children, a very small number of adults also disappeared. 3 to be precise. 2 men, both aged 23, and 1 woman, aged 21. It is worth noting that all the adults who disappeared were extremely small in stature, and could be mistaken for large children, as opposed to adults. Finally, 3 wildlife control rangers happened across a cave with several bodies surrounding it. They entered. Upon entering, they found Mr. Terrell. He was standing over the remains of a young girl, who has since been identified. She was 12, and was out for a hike when she passed by the cave and was taken. She lived about 2 hours away from the cave. Once again, I will not reveal her name. Due to Mr. Terrell recording everything he and his girlfriend did on the trip with an action camera, we know exactly what happened. The camera was found in the same cave as Mr. Terrell, and there are several videos recovered. The severely decomposed body of Iris Hall was also found. The videos are as follows. Videos 1 to 13, all are simply videos of Terrell and Hall exploring the wilderness. They come across as very likable, good-natured, and simply looking for fun. They kiss a lot, laugh a lot, and really love one another. In videos 8, 9, and 12, they speak about marriage and children. Video 14, after about a week of exploring, Terrell and Hall are ready to head back to civilization. Unfortunately, one of the worst blizzards in history occurred on that day. It would last for several weeks. Weather reports cite the temperature as dropping to 33 degrees Celsius. They took shelter in a cave. They are still extremely upbeat, and perfectly composed. They had camping equipment, and still had enough supplies for another few days. They make a few jokes, set up a small camp slightly far away from the mouth of the cave, then turn the camera off. Video 15, a video of Terrell and Hall exploring the cave. It is quite large. Terrell mentions the Wendigo, and says it might be in there with them. He says that the cannibalism aspect of the Wendigo is what disturbs him the most, and that the very thought of it makes him somewhat nauseous. Hall questions how a human could sink to such depths. The video cuts off abruptly for no reason. Presumably a malfunction. Video 16, another video of the duo exploring the cave. Iris suddenly slips and screams. Terrell rushes towards her. He carries her back to the camp. He pulls the camera off his head. It ends up face down in the dirt. The video lasts for several hours before turning off, presumably due to the camera running out of battery. Video 17, Terrell facing the camera. He is noticeably upset. He remarks that Hall's leg is severely injured, the blizzard still going on, and their food is gone. He says he doesn't recall eating any, and Iris doesn't either. He stares blankly at something off-screen for several seconds, then turns the camera off. Video 18, a goodbye video from Terrell and a barely conscious Hall. Only the upper half of Hall can be seen, due to the lower half of her being covered by a blanket. It is impossible to know the extent of the injury she suffered from. Given how much blood is on the blanket, it can only be assumed it is very severe. The two genuinely think they are going to die. Video 19, another video with Terrell facing the camera. He is scarily thin now. Skin like paper, sunken cheeks, blank expression. He says the blizzard has been going on for a long time, and shows no signs of stopping. He remarks that he is starving to death. He talks about the Wendigo, and mutters something under his breath. The word cannibalism is barely audible. Once again, he looks at something off camera. He turns the video off. Video 19 is the final video. But we can easily deduce what happens. Left with no choice, Mr. Terrell cannibalizes Iris Hall. He has a psychotic breakdown. He cannot live with being a cannibal, and to save himself, convinces himself that he is not a cannibal, he is a Wendigo, and eating humans is simply something he must do. The blizzard ends approximately 6 hours after this. Terrell begins his murder spree. I would now like to cross-reference the story Mr. Terrell wrote with facts that actually occurred. The note was written in French, Mr. Terrell's first language. Firstly, he calls the people he killed, men and women, despite them all being children. He also said that the men who took him were much larger than the ones he normally hunted. Of course, this is due to the former being adults. He may have done this to lessen his guilt. He hunted exclusively children due to how easy they are to capture. Upon finding Mr. Terrell, the Rangers panicked and tranquilized Mr. Terrell. Despite being injected with enough tranquilizer to kill an average male, he survived. They threw him into a truck meant for animals, and immediately drove to the nearest police station. He was placed in a holding cell. When he awoke, he attacked the bars of the cell. One wildlife control ranger was still present to give a statement to the police. He still had his tranq rifle with him, and shot Mr. Terrell yet again, due to the panic he was in. He was not charged for anything, as it was a rather understandable reaction. After the holding cell, Mr. Terrell was later transferred directly to our mental facility, and is currently locked in a room just down the hall. The process of getting him in here was a little scuffed, but we made it happen. We had to. He is without a doubt the most dangerous patient I've ever seen, but also the most fascinating. We feed him exclusively pork, as he spits out anything else we give him. I find it rather interesting that Mr. Terrell called the tranq rifles metal poles, and the truck a metal carriage. Without a doubt he knows what guns and trucks are. He seems to feign ignorance about many things. For instance, not knowing how much time has passed. There is a clock in his room. This shows how far his delusion goes. He has convinced himself that he knows nothing about human technology. Why would he? He's a Wendigo. He also said that he had a foot injury from being hit with a rock. While he did have a hairline fracture, it was nothing major. We gave him a cast. He doesn't seem very fond of it. We do frequently remove Mr. Terrell from his room, but only so we can clean him. He won't do it himself, even though his room has a bathroom. Not to mention, we have to treat his infections and injuries. Living in a cave and eating people for a couple of months is not good for you. As for the sheet of paper he wrote on, I had it placed in his room today. Why? Sometimes, people write down exactly what's wrong with them. Terrell will stay locked up for the rest of his life, and probably die still thinking he's a Wendigo. Nothing anyone has said or done can convince him otherwise. Myself, other doctors, and his friends and family. At least, the few friends and family still willing to see him. Terrell doesn't respond to anything we say. He's pretending not to understand us. We have come to the end of the story of Ned Terrell. Well, maybe not quite. He's already turned into an urban legend, and someday someone will probably make one of those serial killer documentaries about him, and after that a horror movie that'll say, based on true events. It'll probably be called The Canadian Cannibal, or something equally as tasteless. Another thing, Terrell is not entirely unique. Wendigo psychosis, a condition which causes humans to resort to cannibalism, has been observed before. To my knowledge, however, no case of it has ever been officially studied. I believe Terrell will be the first. Although we should probably rename the ailment to Terrell's disorder, or something along those lines. He is simply an insane man, that is all. Certainly not possessed by an evil spirit of any kind. I mean, come on. Wendigos. There's no such thing. Now if you'll excuse me, I must shut my windows. The temperature just took an absolute dive. It's rather chilly now. I think there's a blizzard coming in. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Marissa. My dying fiancé saw people I couldn't. I was with my fiancé for almost 12 years before he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Towards the end, he was sent home from the hospital and put on in-home hospice care. It was only a matter of time. The first night home, after everyone visiting had left, I was home alone with him. I could tell he was slowly losing his mind. The cancer had spread, because he was saying things that didn't make sense. For example, he would pick up an imaginary item, hand said item to me, and say, "Here, put this in your purse." Anyways, I was sitting in a chair next to the hospice bed when he said, "Why is she here?" While looking past me. I asked who and he said, "Your Gram." My grandmother lived where we lived. We moved in after she was put in an assisted living facility because she had dementia, and she passed away in 2017. I told him to follow her and see what she wanted, but he got so scared saying he doesn't want to go. The next night sitting next to him he asked me, "Who are they?" I asked who and he said, "In the hallway," but nothing was there. A few nights later he saw my grandmother again. This time he wasn't scared, but I didn't press him further considering his mentality was still declining and he would get easily agitated. I remember thinking, of all people, why is he seeing my Graham and not any of his deceased relatives or friends? He passed away the next morning, holding my hand and surrounded by family. As if it all wasn't creepy to begin with, he died on the 4th anniversary of my grandmother's death. It's been 2 years since he passed and I still sense him, especially at night when I'm in bed. I feel him in the corner of the room, just watching me. Sometimes I'll say out loud, "Please don't scare me," and I'll feel his presence walk across the room out the door. I have since moved and I sense him there as well. I don't exactly see him, but I know exactly how he's dressed and how he looks now. He looks healthy again, like his old self. I'm wondering why he hasn't moved on, but my guess is he's waiting to make sure I'm truly okay and happy. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Retsma age 6. I was sent to hunt a man who turned into a Wendigo. I failed miserably. Alright, I'm not much of a writer, but I've been stuck for hours and I'm bored as hell, so here goes nothing. I'm part of a team that captures, but mostly kills, monsters. And when I say monsters, I mean legitimate monsters. Stuff like chupacabras, manticores, werewolves, and so on and so forth. We're not unique, not by any means. There are hundreds of teams dedicated to the same thing all over the world. And my team isn't necessarily the best one out there, but we're good, and I trust my teammates with my life, all 4 of them. We've been on dozens of missions, and I used to think that we were prepared for anything. But now, one of my teammates is dead, and the rest of us are injured and stuck in the back of an armored truck with a 3-meter-tall Wendigo screeching outside. I'm going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, and my teammates are all unconscious, so I've got nothing but time. I guess I'll start with how I got into this business, and how it works. It'll explain how I got into this mess. I was in the military, not going to say where, and I was good. Extremely good. Incredibly gifted in terms of both physical and mental strength. Good with weapons too. I never thought it would really mean much. Where I come from, the military is conscription-based, which basically means that, if you're a man, you're mandated to drop everything and serve in the military for 2 years. If you don't go to the military, you go to jail instead. Fun. I figured I'd just serve my 2 years, finish, go to university, get a degree in mechanical engineering, and live out the rest of my life. I thought all my military accomplishments would serve for nothing but just an interesting tidbit about me. But clearly, that wasn't the case. Just a few weeks before my 2 years were up, I was pulled into a room, which I never knew existed, and I was immediately met with some of the highest-ranking officers I've seen in my life. Initially, I thought they found out about the empty shell casing I smuggled out from a live firing for a souvenir a couple months ago, and I was bracing myself for a court-martial and a trip to the detention barracks. Hey, I never said I was good at following rules. But that wasn't the case. They told me how impressed they were by my performance, and they were transferring me to a special team based in another country, one whose name I've never heard of, made up of elite soldiers from all over the world. I would go there and continue training for another 4 years, and I would actually be sent out on real military operations. And I wasn't allowed to say no, either. Initially, I was pissed. I had dreams, aspirations. Stuff I actually wanted to do. Not to mention I had just got a girlfriend, and we were still in the honeymoon phase. The idea of just dropping everything and being forced into military service, again, was maddening. That, and the whole real military operations thing. I mean, sure, I could hit 100% of the targets at the firing range, do 95 clean push-ups in a minute, and run for kilometers with a 15-kilogram bag strapped to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean I could fight terrorists or anything. I wanted to argue, make them change their mind, think I wasn't a good fit for it. Maybe even tell them about the shell casing. But before I could voice my protest, they showed me the pay. Oh my God, the pay. So much money. And they promised it would only go up. Now, where I live, the cost of living is high. Very high. Not to mention, I was a little money hungry at the time. I didn't want to become an engineer for the sense of accomplishment, if you get my meaning. So not only did I need the money, I wanted the money. I had a lot of stuff to pay for. I would have to get a house, a car, and a wedding ring for the girlfriend. Yes, I was planning on proposing. Oh, and also steroids. I take steroids. So, I went along with it. I got all my things together, hugged the parents, kissed the girlfriend, had one last drink with the boys, and went off to another country. Went to a base in the middle of nowhere, with a team made up of 20 people. Yup, the whole base for 20 people. I can still hear the Wendigo screaming. It's very distracting, just so you know. Back to the story. And then the training started. It was brutal. Way worse than anything I've ever experienced. At least in the regular military, safety is a concern, albeit not a huge one. Here, safety was unheard of. The trainers, which is all I can call them, since there were no ranks on the base, pushed us as hard as humanly possible. And sometimes, inhumanely. Once, they gave us no food for a week. Another time, they snuck into our bunk, and turned off the safeties on our guns. We had live rounds loaded, by the way. We were supposed to keep our guns loaded and with us at all times. We got screamed at for hours for that one. They said if we were real soldiers we wouldn't have let that happen. Many times I wanted to punch one of them right in the face. It's a literal miracle everyone made it to the end of training with their sanities and bodies intact. Maybe the steroids had something to do with that. I had to hide my use back in my home country, but here they actively encouraged it. They even bought us needles and everything. Reason being was, according to them, if injecting yourself with a gram of testosterone every week makes you run faster, lift heavier, recover quicker, and just basically be a better soldier, then you should do it. At the end of training, we were briefed on our operations too. They told us we were going to see and do things we never would have imagined. They told us monsters were real. Initially, we all laughed, and then were punished for laughing. They made us run 5 kilometers, then continued the briefing. They told us we would be hunting monsters, but only those that were a threat to people. And we wouldn't always kill them, sometimes just capture them. Because some monsters, like minotaurs, produce certain substances that can cure disease. Meanwhile, peaceful creatures, like Sasquatch, would be left alone. All of this said with a straight face. I still thought it was all a big joke. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But then they showed us videos. I still remember them, frame for frame. Monsters eating people, tearing people apart, nightmare stuff. And not to mention the video quality. You can't fake stuff that well. They sent us on our first mission a week after. Put us on a private jet and flew us off to Japan. Said we were looking for something called Gashidakuro. Supposed to be a giant skeleton that eats people. Which I mean, how do you keep the public unaware of something like that? A skeleton as big as a tree, just walking around, straight out of Clash Royale, what? So I clash a little. Big deal. I've got to hand it to the cover-up guys, they don't get the credit they deserve. We found it eventually. 2 of them, actually. Wasn't hard to be honest. They were over 20 meters tall in the middle of a rice field. According to legend, these things were supposed to only attack lone travelers. The village they had just massacred said otherwise. They saw us, let out a bellow, and sprinted straight at us. We ran straight towards the nearby tree line, hoping the oak trees would impede the monsters. One guy wasn't so lucky. He was always the slowest during group runs. He got snatched up, and the skeleton just bit his head clean off. At least his death was instant. Thank God for that. Speaking of instant deaths, I can still hear that Wendigo shuffling around outside. Maybe I should speed up my writing a bit. We took down both of the monsters with rockets. Now, according to folklore, from hundreds of years ago, the Gashitakuro are supposed to be invincible. But they didn't have RPGs hundreds of years ago, did they? When all you've got is a spear against a skeleton 15 times your size, it's going to seem invincible. Props to people from ancient times, I don't know how they survived against these things. So that was my first encounter with the supernatural. We went on a lot more missions after that. Eventually, as we got better, we started getting split up into smaller teams. I started to actually enjoy it. I was only interested in money in the beginning, but a sense of accomplishment started coming with it. I remember the first time I really felt proud of what I did. We were in some town in Greece, with a really small population, less than 10,000. There was a manticore absolutely demolishing the place. It was tearing its way through a row of houses when we came across it. Busting through a wall while a family on the other side was screaming for help. We took it down, and went to check on the family. There was a little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, who ran up and hugged me. My heart melted a little, I'm not going to lie. I've always been fond of children. Her parents were probably scared of us, a bunch of guys with heavy weaponry and armor, but she wasn't. She just knew we saved her life, and she was thankful. I really thought about the impact of my job on that day. So, I was making bank and loving my job. Life was far from perfect, but it was good. And then one day it came. The mission that screwed up my entire life. We were sent off to Canada. There was a confirmed Wendigo presence in a forest very near a town, and people were starting to disappear. We had to take it down ASAP. Not a capture, a kill. Now, this Wendigo was particularly interesting. It used to be a human. That's pretty rare, apparently. Most Wendigos were made by a spirit in the sky or something, and the real ones are a lot stauncher than the people who become Wendigos. This specific Wendigo used to be a guy named Ned Terrell. He went off into the forest with his girlfriend, ironically, to look for a Wendigo, and they got lost in a blizzard or something. Then a few weeks later he turned up and started eating people. A bunch of doctors just figured he lost it and they locked him up. They said he had convinced himself he was a Wendigo, and that it was best for everyone that he stay locked in his room for the rest of his life. He even wrote a letter, pretending he was a Wendigo that got captured by humans. But the thing is, Mr. Terrell wasn't so crazy after all. A couple months after they locked him up, the doctors noticed something. He was growing. A lot. Now, Terrell was already a pretty big guy. About 2 meters, if I remember his profile correctly. Then one day, one of the doctors, I think his name was Bowman, realized he was a lot taller. They measured him, and he was 2.18 meters tall. A while after that, he was 2.34 meters. But even though he kept growing taller, he kept losing weight. Started at svelte 80 kilograms, he was pretty underweight after living in the forest and eating people for a couple months, and ended at 56 kilograms. And he kept getting stronger too. One day he leapt at the guards and took a chunk out of one guy's arm. Thank God for tranq darts. They hit him with enough stuff to take down an elephant. That was the day they decided they had to transfer him out, to a more secure facility. They knew they were dealing with something they didn't have the ability to handle. So they threw him into a truck and transported him to a maximum security prison that was a couple hours away. At least that was the plan. Halfway there, he ate the driver, the guards, busted out and ran off. Pretty soon, reports of a giant emaciated man running through the forest and roaring his head off reached us. We sent a scout, who identified it, or I guess him, as a Wendigo, and my team was sent in. Now according to legend, humans can turn into Wendigos when they choose to resort to cannibalism instead of starving, or they can be possessed and forced to commit cannibalism by Wendigos. Which one is Terrell? Personally, I'm hoping he's the second option. At least that way, he dies with his humanity intact. The sounds outside have died down a little. Mr. Terrell must have gotten bored. I can relax a bit. We went out into the forest, the 5 of us. Body armor, assault rifles, grenades, rockets, all of it. We thought we could take him. We could not. It started off so slowly. We found its tracks and started following them. There was a blizzard going on, which is apparently something Wendigos can do. There's a blizzard going on now actually, but my team had no problems. We followed them in our armored truck for an hour or so. Then all of a sudden, it was just on top of us. Never saw where it came from. Unbelievable speed. It tore my teammate out of the driver's seat and swallowed him whole. He was a big dude too. 1.9 meters tall and built like a young Brock Lesnar. Just got swallowed up, starting from the feet. He screamed the whole time too. I'll never forget it. The Wendigo just unhinged its jaws and leapt on him. One movement, he was suddenly swallowed up to his waist. The truck crashed and the rest of us jumped out and ran for cover, I'll admit it. Even professionals get scared. We just watched our teammate get eaten. Took a while, too. He was screaming and begging, one arm pinned to his side, and the other flailing around. He had broken the #1 rule, always have your gun loaded and with you, so there was nothing he could do. It took us a few seconds, but we opened fire. The Wendigo was squatting on top of the truck, its jaws now around the guy's chest. We killed our teammate, but he was dead anyway, we just granted him mercy. We emptied our mags at that thing, and we only hit it twice. Visibility was poor due to the blizzard, and like I said, it was fast. Seriously, faster than anything I've ever seen. It stood up, and it was huge. Absolutely dwarfed us. It was thin as a rake too, ribs nearly tearing through its skin, skeletal arms, kneecaps very visible. I saw a photo of a family of Indian villagers during the Madras famine once. It looked just like them. Very human looking. Just looking at its face, you would think it was just a starving man. I saw a picture of Mr. Terrell, back when he was a regular guy. You could definitely tell it was him. It tipped the truck over and sprinted straight for us, lashed out, tearing through our armor like it was cardboard. One of us, I don't even remember who, got a grenade off. Unfortunately, not a direct impact, but still made it back off for a while at least. We jumped straight into the back of the truck and put it into lockdown mode. If you're slow and can't figure out what lockdown mode does, it locks the truck down. Metal covers sliding over the windows, a bunch of electronic locks, makes it a fortress. Unfortunately, it also prevents it from driving, because the wheels withdraw into the body. The Wendigo started slamming on the doors, but it couldn't get in. It's strong, but not that strong. So that brings us back to where we started. I sent a distress signal out a while ago, but I got no response. The blizzard may be blocking our communications. The snow's coming down really hard. It's freezing, even with the truck's heater. I'm really hungry for some reason too. I can't have been here for more than a couple hours, but I'm absolutely starving. Even the time I didn't get food for a week at base wasn't this bad. I'm ravenous. But there's no food. And I sure as hell am not going out there. I won't make it very far. My teammates are still out for the count. I don't really know what to do now. I can't hear the Wendigo, but as long as the blizzard's here, I know it's out there. There's a video feed of the outside, but I turned it off. I need to conserve energy. The last I saw the Wendigo, it was eating the snow my teammates' blood spilled on. This thing leaves no traces. It would probably lick blood off the walls if it could. It can't get in, but I can't go out. The situation seems pretty hopeless. But hey, if you're reading this, that means I made it out. I'm typing on the Notes app on my phone, so the only way for someone to see this is if I get out of here. I'm going to take a little break and think about what to do now. Goodbye. Hey guys, I found this story on a phone in the back of a wrecked truck I came across while hiking through the woods. I called the cops as soon as I saw it, but I snooped through it to find any valuables, sorry, and I found this. What do you guys think? It's probably just some BS, right? I mean, there aren't any bodies in the truck, or blood even, which, if this is real, should be the case. There was a really heavy blizzard a day ago, but that's just regular Canadian weather, right? Wendigos and monsters, they're made up. Right? Maybe some aspiring writer crashed and decided to just type a story while he waited for help, then just left his phone and walked away. That doesn't make sense. And the truck was crazy, it was more of a tank than a truck. I don't think writers would really drive stuff like that. And there were a bunch of weapons too. I didn't touch them though. I'm wearing pretty thick gloves, but I can't risk getting any of my DNA on a firearm. I'm out on probation right now. There were prints leading away from the truck at least. Only one set though. And they were huge, I mean seriously. This guy was big. Barefoot too. I hope he made it out alright. I'm walking back to my house while typing this. I still don't know what to make of it. The only way it adds up is if the story is real, but it can't be, right? I mean, I would have seen something by now. Whatever. I already told the cops and they're on the way. They'll figure it out and I'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. I'm just going to focus on getting home now. It's starting to snow pretty heavily again, and the wind's picking up. I hope it's not a blizzard. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.